You've been waiting, haven't you? Waiting for someone to recognize your potential, to tap you on the shoulder and say, "Now it's your turn to lead." That moment of permission you've been anticipating, it's an illusion. Power is never given. It is only ever taken. This is the first truth Machiavelli understood that you've been avoiding. But deeper still, Carl Jung would recognize this waiting as something far more significant than mere social hesitation. It's a profound psychological defense mechanism, one that keeps you safely small while allowing you to blame external forces for your containment. The shadow of the leader within you grows restless, while your conscious mind constructs elaborate justifications for inaction. Have you ever considered that your need for permission might actually be fear disguised as virtue? The Prince wasn't merely a manual for rulers, it was a mirror reflecting the human psyche's relationship with power. When Machiavelli wrote that men sooner forget the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony, he wasn't just being cynical, he was acknowledging the shadow aspects of human nature that polite society pretends don't exist. Jung would recognize this immediately. The shadow contains everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Your discomfort with Machiavellian insights reveals where your own shadow hides. Why does the idea of taking power without permission disturb you so deeply? Perhaps because somewhere within, you recognize its truth, and that recognition threatens the carefully constructed persona you present to the world. The patient one, the deserving one, the one who plays by the rules. You've created a comforting narrative that leadership should be bestowed upon the worthy, but history tells a different story. Look at every transformative leader throughout time. Did they wait? Did Martin Luther King Jr. ask for permission to dream? Did Gandhi request approval to resist? Did Marie Curie seek authorization to revolutionize our understanding of physics in a field dominated by men? No. The archetypal pioneer in the collective unconscious knows that new paths are never sanctioned in advance. They are carved through the wilderness by those brave enough to walk untrodden ground. The permission paradigm is a construct of the collective, designed to maintain order by keeping the innovative, the disruptive, the transformative safely contained. Your adherence to this paradigm isn't noble. It's a surrender to the comfort of the known over the anxiety of potential. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, Jung reminds us. Consider how you feel about those who seize power without waiting. Does their audacity trigger judgment in you? Resentment? Perhaps even hidden admiration? These reactions are projections of your own relationship with power. The leader you secretly wish to become lives in your shadow, acting out through your projections onto others. You call them arrogant when they don't wait for validation, yet part of you envies their freedom from the chains of external approval. This tension between your conscious desire to be recognized and your unconscious desire to be unleashed creates the very stagnation you attribute to external causes. Did you know that Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming your complete self, requires integrating these shadow aspects? The permission seeker and the power taker must be reconciled. This isn't about becoming ruthlessly Machiavellian. It's about acknowledging that within you exists both the humble servant and the commanding prince. Leadership emerges when you stop fractioning yourself into socially acceptable pieces and integrate the fullness of your capabilities, including those parts that might seem threatening or inappropriate to the collective. The leader who waits for permission has already abdicated the essential quality of leadership, the willingness to move forward into uncertainty, carrying others through the unknown by the sheer force of vision and will. You've been taught that patience is a virtue, that good things come to those who wait. This teaching serves the established order, doesn't it? It keeps the potentially disruptive safely on hold while maintaining the status quo. Jung would see this as the tension between the individual psyche and the collective consciousness, a tension that must be navigated, not surrendered to. The archetypal hero doesn't wait for the quest to be authorized. The hero recognizes the call and chooses to answer it, often against the explicit warnings of the established order. Think of how many transformative ideas were initially rejected, how many visionaries were first labeled as troublemakers or worse. The collective resists change. That's its nature. By waiting for its permission, you align yourself with resistance to your own potential. Machiavelli understood something profoundly psychological when he wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see but to few to feel. The masses perceive only the surface of leadership, the title, the office, the apparent authority. But true leadership is felt. It's the impact you create, the energy you generate, the transformation you catalyze. You've been focusing on the appearance rather than the essence, the position rather than the function. This is why waiting for permission keeps you trapped. You're pursuing the shadow of leadership rather than its substance. Jung might diagnose this as a confusion between the persona, the social face of leadership, and the self, the authentic core of leadership. The permission you seek is permission to wear the mask, but authentic leadership emerges from the integrated self, not from any role granted by external authorities. Have you considered what's really happening when you wait for permission? You're outsourcing your authority to others. You're saying, I don't trust my own judgment enough to move forward without external validation. This is not merely a professional stance. It's a profound psychological pattern that likely extends throughout your life. Jung would point out that this pattern has roots in your personal history, perhaps in a childhood where initiative was punished, where you learned that safety lay in compliance rather than creation. But what served you then constrains you now. The unconscious association between independent action and danger keeps you tethered to external authority long after you've outgrown the need for such protection. Breaking this pattern requires more than professional strategy. It demands psychological excavation, bringing to consciousness the buried assumptions that chain your potential to others' approval. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate, Jung warned. When you lament that leadership opportunities don't come your way, that others are chosen over you despite your qualifications, are you not calling unconscious patterns by the name of fate? The Machiavellian perspective cuts through this self-deception with uncomfortable clarity. Opportunity doesn't arise, it is created. Power isn't bestowed, it's claimed. By waiting for what you perceive as the proper, sanctioned path to leadership, you're allowing unconscious fears to direct your professional journey while attributing the results to external circumstances. This is the essence of what Jung called projection, seeing in the outer world what is actually generated from within. Think of the child within you who learned to seek permission. What were they really seeking? Safety? Belonging? Love? These are profound human needs, but they've become confused with professional advancement in your adult psychology. When you wait for someone to authorize your leadership, you're actually seeking a form of archetypal parental approval that no workplace can truly provide. This confusion of psychological needs with professional strategies creates a double bind. The very approach you believe will secure your advancement actually signals to others your unreadiness to lead. True leaders aren't authorized. They're recognized after they've already begun leading. The authority comes after the action, not before it, a paradox that the permission seeker can never resolve. Machiavelli's insight that there is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things speaks to the inherent risk of leadership. Jung would understand this as the necessary encounter with chaos that precedes new creation, the journey into the unknown that is central to both psychological growth and innovative leadership. When you wait for permission, you're attempting to skip this essential trial, to find a safe path through dangerous terrain. But such a path doesn't exist. Leadership, like individuation, requires voluntary engagement with uncertainty. The anxiety you feel when contemplating unauthorized action isn't a warning to stop. It's the psychological threshold guardian that tests your readiness to transform. You keep looking for examples, don't you? Cases where patience was rewarded, where the dutiful lieutenant was eventually promoted to general. These examples exist, of course, but they're exceptions that prove the rule. And more importantly, they reveal your desire for a world where justice prevails automatically, where merit is always recognized, where the deserving are inevitably rewarded. Jung would recognize this as the longing for the great mother archetype, the nurturing force that sees all and rewards accordingly. But this archetypal desire, when projected onto organizational life, becomes a fantasy that prevents you from engaging with reality as it is. Organizations aren't maternal. They're complex human systems with their own dynamics of power. Waiting for the organization to notice and nurture your potential is a displacement of childhood longings onto structures never designed to fulfill them. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes, Jung reminded us. External permission is the dream. Internal authority is the awakening. The permission paradigm keeps you focused outward, on titles, recognitions, validations, while leadership begins with the inward journey toward wholeness. When you integrate the shadow aspects of leadership, the ambition, the willingness to disrupt, the comfort with others' discomfort, you no longer need external authorization because you recognize that true authority comes from within. This integration doesn't happen through thinking alone. It requires action. Taking unauthorized steps, making decisions that might be questioned, standing in the discomfort of others' disapproval. These are not merely professional strategies, but psychological exercises that strengthen the self against the pull of collective expectation. Machiavelli advised that a prince ought to inspire fear in such a way that, if he does not win love, he avoids hatred. This isn't just political strategy, it's psychological insight. The leader who acts without permission will inevitably generate resistance. Understanding this as inevitable rather than avoidable is crucial to psychological preparation for leadership. Jung might frame this as the necessary tension between the individual and the collective, a tension that can't be resolved through universal approval, but must be managed through conscious engagement with both internal and external forces. Your fear of this tension, disguised as virtue or procedure, keeps you waiting for a moment when leadership would come without resistance. That moment will never arrive. Leadership and resistance are inseparable. The capacity to stand firm in the face of pushback is not a secondary quality of leadership, but its essential foundation. Consider how waiting for permission maintains the illusion of perfection. As long as you haven't acted, you haven't failed. Your potential leadership remains pristine, unmarred by the inevitable mistakes and adjustments of actual leading. Jung would recognize this as a form of what he called the pure eternus, or eternal youth, the pattern of remaining in potential rather than actualizing into the messiness of manifestation. This psychological position feels safe but prevents individuation. Leadership, like all meaningful human endeavors, requires embracing imperfection, beginning before you feel ready, and learning through action rather than preparation. The permission paradigm allows you to preserve a perfect self-image at the cost of actual growth. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Jung's observation applies powerfully to leadership. When you wait for permission, you're avoiding the transformative chemical reaction of genuine leadership engagement. True leadership changes both the leader and the led. It's a dynamic, evolving relationship rather than a static position. By waiting to be installed in leadership rather than engaging in leadership behaviors, you're attempting to preserve yourself from the very transformation that would make leadership possible. This fear of transformation, of becoming someone different through the practice of leading, often underlies the permission-seeking behavior that seems, on the surface, merely procedural or political. Have you considered that your reluctance to lead without permission might mask a deeper reluctance to accept the burden of leadership itself? Machiavelli understood that leadership brings accountability, that followership does not. Men of great abilities are slow to promise and prompt to perform, he noted, implicitly acknowledging that leadership positions one as a target for criticism and evaluation. When you wait for permission, you're also waiting for authorization to be held accountable, for permission to be judged. This hesitation reflects the shadow's awareness of vulnerability, the knowledge that to lead is to expose oneself to scrutiny and potential failure. Jung would recognize this as the ego's attempt to avoid the crucible of public judgment, a natural but limiting defensive posture that must be consciously overcome for individuation to proceed. The collective unconscious contains the archetype of the ruler, the one who creates order from chaos, who establishes boundaries and maintains them. But it also contains the rebel, the one who challenges existing order to create new possibilities. Your permission paradigm honors the ruler while repressing the rebel, creating an imbalance in your archetypal expression. Jung would suggest that wholeness requires integrating both archetypes, becoming capable of both maintaining necessary order and disrupting limitations when they no longer serve. The leader who only maintains never innovates. The leader who only disrupts never builds. By waiting for permission, you're allowing only the socially sanctioned aspects of leadership to express while suppressing the necessary revolutionary elements that drive progress and transformation. Follow that will and that way which experience confirms to be your own, Jung advised. Your unique leadership style won't emerge from replicating others or following prescribed paths. It comes from aligning your actions with your deepest values and insights. When you wait for permission, you surrender this alignment to external judgment. potentially forcing your leadership expression into molds that don't fit your authentic capabilities. True leadership isn't generic, it's as individual as a fingerprint. The permission paradigm standardizes what should be distinctive, homogenizes what should be unique. Breaking free from this paradigm isn't just professionally strategic, it's psychologically essential for expressing your particular gifts and perspectives. Machiavelli observed that the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. This insight extends beyond politics to psychology. Who do you surround yourself with? Are they permission granters or freedom expanders? Do they reinforce your constraints or challenge your limitations? The psychological environment you create through your associations either supports or undermines your capacity to act without external authorization. Jung would recognize that we often unconsciously select relationships that maintain our current psychological position rather than those that facilitate growth. If you've surrounded yourself with people who validate waiting for permission, you've created an external echo of your internal resistance to autonomous action. Ask yourself, what would happen if you led without waiting? What's the worst that could occur? Often, the imagined consequences of unauthorized leadership are far more catastrophic than any realistic outcome. This catastrophizing serves a psychological purpose. It justifies inaction while preserving self-image. I would lead, but the consequences would be terrible, maintains the illusion of potential without the risk of actualization. Jung might identify this as a form of neurotic avoidance, where fantasies of disaster prevent engagement with manageable reality. Breaking this pattern requires reality testing these catastrophic assumptions, taking small, unauthorized actions, and discovering that the world doesn't end when you step beyond prescribed boundaries. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents, Jung wrote. Consider how your relationship with authority and permission might be carrying forward patterns from your family system. Did you have parents who waited for authorization that never came? Did you witness the consequences of overstepping boundaries? These early observations form templates for your own relationship with power and permission. The psychological work of leadership often involves differentiating your professional choices from these inherited patterns, recognizing where your caution comes from historical context rather than present reality. Without this differentiation, you may find yourself honoring limitations that belong to another generation, another context, another life altogether. Machiavelli's assertion that the lion cannot protect himself from traps and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves, speaks to the necessity of psychological flexibility in leadership. Waiting for permission keeps you fixed in a single mode, the compliant, rule-following fox, while effective leadership requires adapting your approach to changing circumstances. Jung would frame this as the integration of various aspects of the psyche, the ability to access different archetypes as situations demand. The permission paradigm locks you into rigidity, preventing the fluid movement between different modes of engagement that characterizes effective leadership in complex environments. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Jung reminded us, the clarity needed for leadership doesn't come from external validation, but from internal alignment. When you know your capabilities, your values, your purpose, you no longer need permission to act in accordance with them. This self-knowledge isn't intellectual, it's experiential. It comes from testing yourself against reality, from acting and observing the results, from failing and recovering. The permission seeker avoids these essential experiences, remaining theoretically capable but practically untested. True leadership capacity is forged in the crucible of unauthorized action, in the willingness to step forward before the path is fully illuminated. Consider that leadership itself is a form of what Jung called active imagination, the capacity to envision new possibilities and make them manifest. The leader sees what doesn't yet exist and brings it into being through conviction and action. This creative function can't operate under the constraints of permission because, by definition, permission can only be granted for what is already conceived by the permission giver. Truly innovative leadership operates beyond the current conception, in the realm of what hasn't yet been imagined by the collective. By waiting for permission, you surrender the most essential function of leadership, the capacity to go beyond what is already known and sanctioned. You might object that unauthorized leadership risks chaos, that permission systems exist for good reason. There's truth here, but Jung would recognize this as only half the picture. Yes, some boundaries serve necessary functions, but others merely preserve outdated structures. Discerning which boundaries serve life and which constrain it is the wisdom of mature leadership. This discernment doesn't come from abstract analysis, but from attunement to the deeper currents of what wants to emerge. When you feel the tension between established order and necessary innovation, you're experiencing the fundamental creative tension that drives both psychological and organizational evolution. Waiting for permission resolves this tension prematurely, sacrificing emergence for safety. Knowledge rests not upon truth alone, but upon error also, Jung noted. The permission paradigm attempts to eliminate error by ensuring that all action is pre-approved, but in doing so, it eliminates the essential learning that comes from mistakes. Leadership capacity develops through trial and error, through the integration of lessons that can only be learned through direct experience. When you wait for permission, you're attempting to skip the educational phase of leadership development, to arrive at mastery without the messy middle of experimentation and adjustment. This isn't possible. The most effective leaders have rich histories of unauthorized attempts, instructive failures, and iterative improvements that couldn't have occurred within the constraints of pre-approval. Machiavelli advised that a wise ruler ought never to keep faith when by doing so it would be against his interests. While this may seem immoral, psychologically it points to something profound: the necessity of breaking implicit contracts when they no longer serve growth. The permission paradigm is an implicit contract with authority. I will not act without your approval. Breaking this contract feels like betrayal, triggering guilt and anxiety. Jung would recognize these feelings not as signals to retreat, but as the necessary psychological tension that accompanies growth. The guilt of unauthorized action isn't evidence of wrongdoing, but of boundary crossing, the essential step beyond comfortable limitation that all meaningful development requires. You've been waiting for the perfect moment, the clear sign, the unmistakable invitation to lead. But Jung would tell you that such clarity is an illusion, that meaningful action always occurs in the midst of uncertainty. The art of letting things happen, action through non-action, letting go of oneself, became for me the key to the problem of how to live, he wrote, seemingly contradicting our theme. But look deeper. Jung's letting things happen isn't passive waiting. It's active surrender to the deeper currents of the psyche, the willingness to be moved by authentic impulse rather than controlled by conscious calculation. True leadership emerges not from the ego's careful planning, but from alignment with this deeper movement, the willingness to be an instrument of what needs to happen, regardless of external authorization. The permission you've been waiting for already exists within you. It was always there, in the form of your unique capabilities, your distinct perspective, your authentic response to what you see needs doing. Jung called this the self, the organizing center of the psyche that transcends the ego's limited understanding. When you act from this center, you're not acting without permission. You're acting from the only permission that ultimately matters, the authorization of your most complete self. This isn't hubris or self-importance. It's the humble recognition that your specific configuration of talents and insights exists for a reason, that your particular way of seeing and responding has purpose beyond your personal advancement or security. Machiavelli understood that men rise from one ambition to another. First, they seek to secure themselves against attack, and then they attack others. This psychological progression mirrors the journey from permission-seeking to autonomous leadership. Your focus on securing permission is fundamentally defensive. It seeks to ensure safety before action. But leadership requires moving beyond defense to initiative, from securing approval to generating impact. This transition is not merely strategic but developmental. It represents psychological maturation from dependence to autonomy. The permission paradigm keeps you in the defensive posture, preventing the developmental shift to generative action that characterizes mature leadership. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being, Jung wrote. Leadership at its core is precisely this: kindling light where darkness has prevailed, creating clarity where confusion has reigned, establishing direction where drift has been the norm. This purpose can't be fulfilled while waiting for permission, because the nature of light is to precede authorization. The sun doesn't wait for the world to wake before it rises. Its rising is what makes waking possible. Your leadership capacity, your unique way of kindling light, exists to function before recognition, to operate in advance of validation. By waiting for permission, you reverse the natural order, expecting recognition to precede the very illumination that would make recognition possible. The time for waiting has passed. The permission you seek will never arrive in the form you expect, because true authorization doesn't precede action. It emerges from it. Leadership begins not with appointment, but with commitment. Not with position, but with decision. The Machiavellian truth meets the Jungian depth in this understanding. Power acknowledges power. When you begin to lead from your center without apology or hesitation, the permissions you thought you needed become irrelevant. A new quality of engagement emerges. Not the provisional, tentative leadership of the permission seeker, but the grounded, generative leadership of one who recognizes that authority comes from the Latin auctor, meaning one who brings into being. True leadership is always a creative act. It brings into being what didn't exist before. And creation has never waited for permission, not in the cosmos, not in nature, not in human affairs, and certainly not in you.